Hello, and welcome to another of my series of conversations. My name is John Cornicello. I'm going live on Mondays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern. Coming up, we've got Monday, August 3rd with JB Sally on environmental portraiture and taking your strobes outdoors. Holger Mischke is going to be here on Thursday the 6th to talk about his photography and some stunning black and white images. Then Jack Reznicki will be here on, August 10th, a Monday, to talk about copyright for photographers. And Michelle Bates on plastic cameras on Thursday, August 13th. You can see the full schedule of all my recordings at cornicello.com/conversations. Today, my guest is photographer and Photoshop artist Lee Varis. Lee has over 40 years in the commercial photography world and is the author of the book Skin. So Lee, what are we going to be covering today?
Well, today I thought I'd talk about my 10-channel workflow, which is an image enhancement mostly about luminosity blending in Photoshop, and I can show you some techniques that can create some very dramatic effects very easily, and it's a good strategy or a good way of working through image enhancement in general.
Great, so let's get started.
Okay.
Well, unless people have some questions we want to ask before we get started here, just to see if they'll be covered. That's a quiet.
No questions already. I don't know.
No.
Wait till you see what I'm.
I have one to begin with.
Okay. All right.
I'm looking for either something in Photoshop or a plugin or an app that will allow me to do pointillism or impressionism.
Try Topaz Impressions. Have you seen that one?
Everybody says Topaz, but and JP said to me just yesterday that I should look into the brushes in Photoshop and do the brush strokes myself.
Yeah, that's another way of doing it.
I'll see if I can just show you a really basic technique for kind of simulating that in Photoshop.
Okay.
Just remind me, and I'll kind of get to it at the end.
Okay.
Cool. So let's get started, Lee.
All right. Let's do the share screen. Oh, you've disabled screen sharing.
I didn't give that to you yet. Sorry. Advanced sharing options. You should be able to do it now.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, desktop. Okay, share. Here we go. Let me get this over here. Oop. Not that one, the other one. Oop. Here we go. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with, or I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about the 10-channel workflow, which is my new image enhancement technique. And this is really an adaptation of my work with Dan Margulis. And I had the privilege of studying with Dan in many of his workshops. The 10-channel workflow uses the individual channel luminosity, like RGB, CMYK, and LAB to reshape the value structure of the original color image in a very powerful way. But before we get into that, let's see. Let me back up just a little bit here. And it's because I started on the wrong
Yeah, let's
slide here. So I just thought I'd give you a quick rundown of kind of my background, where I'm coming from. So I've been in commercial photography for well over 40 years. We won't talk about how old I am, but I was sort of right there at the very beginning of the transition to digital. So I kind of feel like I have half of my years are in regular analog photography or on film, and the other half has been all digital all the time. And certainly now we've fully made the transition. So just to give you a quick rundown, this is kind of my my history, I was working in movie posters, in entertainment advertising, and mostly doing movie posters and sometimes photoshopping for the movie posters. But in this case, this is my most famous poster, and the only thing I can take credit for here is the photo of the moth. But I was pretty involved. This is one where I did both the Photoshop and the photography. And then there's plenty of them where I just did the photography, and this was a body double shoot, and it's really kind of a Frankenstein a composite of about 3 different shots, where the body was it was this kickboxing aerobics instructor that we found, and the legs came from one shot, the upper torso and the arms came from another shot. The head came from an actual shot of Angelina Jolie, and actually the boobs came from Angelina Jolie because our model was not as well endowed. So you can see when we get into the movie posters, a lot of it's very photoshopped together. I was also the kind of unofficial photographer of the Enterprise for all of the Star Trek movie posters, up until the point where they just stopped making models and it went all CGI. So these were the last 2 movies that used actual physical models. In fact, the one shown on this poster was actually a toy from the Paramount gift shop. And we photographed that for the movie poster. So now I want to get into the 10-channel workflow, right? You've got a little, see where I'm coming from. Like I said, this is from basically an adaptation of the work of Dan Margulis, who's a real Photoshop genius. To understand what we're talking about here, we're just going to kind of review what the essentials of the Photoshop, the photographic process. And it's all about capturing light. And of course, that means that, you know, the most important step is getting that exposure. Then we have to render the exposure in a way that conveys our intentions for the image. And this is a creative, interpretive process that involves an interplay between tone or value and color. And a very important concept is that color is not the most critical component of a photographic image. The viewer will respond more strongly to lights and darks in the image over color, and that's one reason that black and white images can be so successful. So control over all these elements and post-processing to manage that tone and color is essential to the whole process. So to kind of illustrate this, let's look at this image. Now, this is not the most impressive shot, but this image is very information rich. We can identify lots of different details, number of people, where they're located in the scene, what they're doing, as well as a number of other items of interest in the scene. Now, if I drain out all of the lights and darks, and I end up with just the color in one uniform brightness. Now, on screen here, the more saturated colors may look a little darker, but you know, do we have a photograph here? It's got all the color of the photograph, but I would submit that we no longer have a photograph. So if you hadn't seen the previous image, in fact, you'd have a hard time figuring out what this is a picture of. Now, if I take all the color away and leave just the brightness values, and we end up with a black and white photo, it's very clear what's going on here. We have no difficulty identifying most of the details in the image. We got a real photograph. When we add the color back, yes, we have an additional level of information. But whether the color is more saturated like this, or less saturated, or cooler, or warmer, it doesn't have as much impact on the overall image as the range of light and dark values. So I invite you all to keep this in mind next time someone tries to sell you on the use of super wide gamut color spaces like ProPhoto RGB. It's not about the color, it's about the lights and darks. So we're going to go into a little exploration of this concept and how we can utilize these lights and darks in really creative ways. And we're going to use this very colorful photo of a sunflower. And what I want you to think about is all color images are actually made up of grayscale channels. So a color image can exist in at least 10 different grayscale channels. And these represent the 3 color workspaces in Photoshop here, shown from the top down: RGB, LAB, and CMYK. And each of these channels can offer something unique for our tone and contrast enhancements. So it allows us to go from this image, which is not bad by itself, but we can go from here to here very easily and in a very controlled way. So now let's dive into Photoshop here. So I'm going to switch to Photoshop. Here's our sunflower. And basically, I always start with a sort of examination of the channels, right? So if we look at the red channel, right, and the green channel, they both look really different. And both of those look way different than the blue channel. So we've got essentially 3 different grayscale renderings of this image. And we're going to see how we can utilize that in combination against the original color image to create an interesting effect here. So when I'm thinking about enhancing a color image, I first think, let's make a black and white. So there's a couple of different ways we can make a black and white. Obviously, the obvious one for people is to use the black and white adjustment. We put this adjustment in here, and like here's the default, which is of course horrible in this particular image. But we can kind of go, yeah, let's make the yellow flowers brighter, and let's make the blue sky darker. In fact, I can get kind of almost an infrared look out of it, right? Now, one of the problems with using the black and white adjustment filter, and I'm just going to zoom in here along this edge, you can kind of see there's this little light edge here, which is kind of, it's kind of like an artifact, really, where Photoshop has a hard time deciding when it stops being blue and starts being green, right, at that edge transition. And so you have these kind of hard little, these little lines will show up if you push the black and white rendering too far. So that's one reason why I kind of avoid using the black and white adjustment tool, because it is prone to these kinds of artifacts. So instead, my usual default, if I'm just going to do a simple black and white conversion, is I'm going to use the channel mixer. So all of these presets in here are black and white conversions. So we can say, they even have an infrared version, which doesn't really look anything like infrared here. But here's black and white, the blue filter, right? And guess what? It's all just the blue channel. If I do, red filter, that's the red channel. But if I combine them, let's say like an orange filter, I'm like 50% red and 50% green. So that's kind of interesting. But you can also subtract a filter or subtract a channel. In this case, if we subtract the brightness of the blue channel, we can get pretty much that same effect. But the beauty of this is, oops, let's go the other way. The beauty of this is when I get right down to that edge, I don't have that little artifact, right? Because I'm using the channel structure of the color image, not having Photoshop try to decide what is green and what is blue, but I'm just using the channels that exist, and they're already grayscale, and they already blend together very nicely. So, okay, so that's one approach, is just to use the channel mixer to create these kind of interesting black and white conversions. But I'm going to propose a slightly different way of doing this. And what we're going to do instead is I'm going to put those channels into layers. So first I'm going to create an empty layer to hold my red channel. So we'll call this red. And I'm going to go up this, I use this a lot, image, apply image. And this is sort of a calculation that has been in Photoshop for a very, very long time, and hardly anybody ever uses it. But I can use this, the only image that's the same pixel dimensions that I have open is the sunflower image. So that's my source, but instead of just the RGB composite, I'm going to go to the red channel. And you can see that it doesn't really matter what the blending is, because that layer was empty. it's sort of like normal. I'm just putting the red channel in that empty layer, and you can see it here, right? So it's on top of the color image, but I'm extracting that red channel from the color image and putting it in a layer. Okay, so I'm still thinking black and white, and I like the dark sky and the red channel, but I'm kind of missing, you know, if I turn this off and just look at the channels again, you know, there's my red channel. You know, I like the dark sky, but I'm missing some detail in the flower. All the detail is here in the green channel, right? So I'll put that red channel up there, but what if I could take the green channel petals and just blend it in here so that I had both the red and the green channel, or at least the parts of those channels that I really like, right? So this actually turns out to be pretty easy to do. So I'm going to get another empty layer here, and we're going to call this green. And I'm going to go and get the green channel. So I go back to my apply image. And now here, this is important. Instead of the merged version, which has now already been converted to grayscale using the red channel, I'm going to go back down to the background layer and find the original green channel, right? So now I've got the green channel on top of the red, right? But the sky is really light in the green channel. So wouldn't it be great if I could take just the darker petals and blend it into the darker sky here? And that's pretty easy with blending options here. And right now we're using normal. But what if I said darken? So darken is a blending option that says just take the pixels in this layer that are darker than the underlying image and use those, substitute those. And what we have happening is that now the flower is darker, but the sky retains that full darkness of the red channel. So this is a bit different than just blending 50% of the green channel into the red channel. I'm actually doing an intelligent blend that's darkening the red channel with the elements in the green channel that are actually darker. Now, that's also darkening the center of the flower, right? But I have a layer here. I could put a layer mask up. I can get a brush and just paint with black to mask off. Let's do that at 100%. Mask it off, right? So now I a very simple mask, right? I can blend that in. I'm going to just feather this mask a little bit out to the edge there, just a little bit more. Okay, now I'm pretty happy with that. Now I've used the red and the green channel. What can I do with the blue channel? That's kind of interesting, because if we look at this in the channels and I go, you know, to the blue channel, you look at that and go, what the hell can I do with that? That's a crazy blue channel because there's no blue in the flower. It's all in the sky. But that's actually great because I'm gonna create that infrared effect. So we're gonna add another layer here, and this is gonna be our blue channel. So same sort of thing, image, apply image. And I'm gonna go to the background and this time get the blue. And instead, there's this little invert checkbox. I can invert that whole channel and now multiply this over the rest of it. And I've darkened the sky. I've got that infrared effect. But because it's in a layer, again, I can add a layer mask. And this time I'm gonna do a gradient, and we'll do that at 100%, and we'll do black to white. So I'll pick that first, right? So if I start my gradient here and drag up, right? So I'm masking off the lower half of this channel. And now I've created a graduated filter effect that's perfectly masked, and I haven't had to do hardly anything here to create this. So this whole process, I'm thinking about creating a black and white, right? So I've now got a very dramatic black and white rendering of this colorful sunflower, And I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. Let's get the color back on top of it. So I'm going to duplicate this color channel, bring it up to the top, and we'll put that in color mode. And you can kind of see that I've added the color, but I have the original, I have the black and white rendering here because I'm only using the color. I'm not using the tonal structure or the lights and darks. So I've created a radically different looking image than my original image. Now, what if I wanted to get back the full color of the petals? Well, I could mask it, but here's another kind of crazy effect. I'm going to duplicate this image. And so let me just duplicate it. And instead of flattening, I'm going to duplicate all of the layers. I'm just going to make a copy. Now this copy, I'm going to convert to LAB. So I'm going to go image mode LAB. Now Photoshop warns you here. It says, well, when you're converting and you have layers, you better watch out because the image, it can affect the appearance of the image if you don't flatten the image. So I'm not going to flatten it, and let's see what happens. So what happens is in LAB, this channel structure, that the petals of the flower can be so bright that they're white, but also so saturated that they have full color. And this is an impossible color. It's a saturated color that's so bright that it's white. Photoshop doesn't know what to do with that, so it kind of splits the difference and it tries to put color in where the highlight was. So originally in my RGB version, that's the same layers did that, but in the LAB version, this color layer works completely differently. So that's just a little thing to kind of, mess with your mind. I don't actually use this approach very often, but I just wanted to show it to you because it's kind of interesting. So let's look at another image, right? So this is a very simple one. I wanted to show you how you could build up, the black and white image and use these different RGB channels to restructure the value of the blacks and whites of the image. Let's look at a landscape image. This was an image that I sort of a grab shot. I was leaning out the window of the car and I just clicked, and it's very bright white clouds. The foreground's a little subdued, but overall you'd say, yeah, it's okay. Maybe we could put a curve on it and add some contrast.
I always wondered where clouds were made.
Yeah, they're the steam exhaust from a power plant.
Yeah, we've got a place like that here in Seattle that makes the clouds too.
So
I also drop them out of airplanes.
So again, so I have a color image, and my first strategy, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the channels. So I go to the channels panel and I go individually and look at the channels and go, okay, red, that's the red channel, that's the green channel, and the blue channel. And so I'm looking for, is there a channel that really just says, hey, I'm the best one for a black and white conversion? Is there one that really looks like it has the best overall contrast? Well, it certainly wouldn't be the blue channel. I mean, the green's a little bit better, but really the red channel, I mean, we're almost done, right? That's way better than any of the other individual channels. So I'm going to start by using this channel. So now instead of, I want to end up with a color image. I'm not a black and white image. If I wanted a black and white, I might just be inclined to just use that red channel. But I want a color image, and I want to recraft this. I want to put some more drama in the sky, and I want to brighten up this foreground area because it's a little underexposed relative to the bright sky. So, but thinking in terms of black and white, I'm going to get my red channel into this layer, much like we did with the sunflower. So we'll do image, apply image, and instead of well, it doesn't really matter, merged at this point, it's just so we're going to go to the red channel, and put that in there, okay? And here's sort of the whole approach to using the grayscale channel structure against the original color. So we're going to change this from normal to luminosity. Okay, so pretty dramatic. I mean, you know, what's happened here is I've managed to darken the sky and brighten the foreground in one move. That would be really hard to do something like this with a curve unless I used a lot of masks, and I'd get, you know, some halo glow or something like that. This is seamless. Everything lines up. I don't have to worry about, you know, the sky around the clouds, if the clouds got darker or not, because I'm using the luminosity from that red channel to darken the sky and lighten the red in the rocks. So it's already looking a lot better. Now, the thing that's sort of missing now is it appears to be sort of flat in color. So, and we have an RGB document, but whenever I think, okay, I want to really enhance the color, that's when I start thinking LAB. So I'm going to duplicate this document, and I'm going to go ahead and flatten it because I'm not going to rely on any weird effect of, you know, changing from into LAB with layers. So I'm just going to make this copy. I might as well label it LAB just so I keep that straight. And it's just going to be a flat LAB version of this document. So in order for it to be LAB, I have to actually convert it into LAB. So I'm just going to go image mode LAB. All right, now the LAB is very interesting because it puts the lightness in one channel. This is the lights and darks of the image all contained. The luminosity of the image is in one channel. And these other channels are very strange. So the A channel and the B channel, they look really weird because the brightness values in these channels are controlling the color. So the A channel sort of represents the blue yellow, the green magenta vector of the color. So lighter things, you can see over here, this rock, lighter things, if it's lighter than mid gray or 50% luminosity, it's going to be more magenta. If it's darker, like the sky up in here is darker than 50% luminosity, that's going to be more blue, more green. And if it's neutral, it's neither magenta nor green, right? So there's a little bit of magenta in the blue sky, not much. It's fairly gray, but I know that there's no color in this cloud. So these are actually 50% luminosity. And you can kind of see up here in the L channel, it's around 50, 55. It's not quite absolutely neutral. It's a little brighter, so it's slightly bluer than absolute neutral. But over here on the rocks, that's 61. That's definitely brighter. So that's going to be more magenta. And it makes sense, right? So one of the unique attributes of this LAB document is I can do something like this. I'm just going to put a curves adjustment, a flat curve, and I'm not adjusting it at all, but I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to overlay. So overlay, if you apply the image to itself in overlay mode, you get a big boost in contrast. And you can kind of see, essentially this curves layer is like taking the image and duplicating it into that layer. But it gives me some flexibility of changing things. But right now it's amplifying, it's adding contrast into all three channels. So we're getting this extra boost of contrast. And really, I just want to enhance the color. So I'm going to use another little trick here in the layers panel under blending options. It's sort of halfway down in the layer options menu here. Blending options gives us additional blending options. So I'm going to pull that in here. So we can uncheck the L channel. So we're not going to use this overlay against the L channel. So now we're only enhancing the contrast in the A and B channel, right? So now let's look at those channels again. So now when we look at these channels, going back, I've actually added more contrast in them. So this red is brighter and the sky is darker. In the B channel, which is the yellow-blue vector, right? If we look at the B channel, things that are brighter than 50% are more yellow, and things that are darker than 50% are more blue. And I've really cranked the contrast here, but you can kind of see the clouds stay pretty gray. They're pretty close to neutral gray. And now this is going to have some interesting effects. So what I can do now is I'm going to take both of these together. In fact, let's do one thing first before I can apply this color against the original image. But I'm going to go back here into my blending options because I think this sky is just, it's too vivid. It's just too vivid. So I'm going to go to the B channel here and I'm going to blend out some of that in the sky. So I'm going to take this, this layer is the curve. I'm just going to say, if I take this down, this black slider here in this layer, I'm blending through the blue part of that channel so that I'm not enhancing the contrast in the blue. And now here's the little trick. If I hold down the Option or Alt key and click on this slider, I can split it apart and gradually blend back some of that blue saturation. So when it gets to be, you know, as bright as I want it, like I'll say that's acceptably vivid. And that's quite a bit different than all the saturation is just too electric blue, right? So let's blend that out. So I go to 128, which is exactly in the middle for the calculation. That's that neutral point, right? And if I can get my mouse to behave itself here. And now I'm going to split that channel apart, add just back a little bit of that blue enhancement. Okay. And I'm going to now select both of these layers and convert this into a smart object. All right, so the reason I did that is I'm now going to drag this more colorful version back onto the original document. So the trick here is we're going to get the Move tool. I hold down the Shift key. I click somewhere inside the image and I'm going to drag it up to that tab. Now this is the original RGB document. I'm going to pull this down and apply that on top of the image. So now I can just add just the color from that LAB enhanced saturation onto the black and white, or onto the image that I've already adjusted with this red channel. So the beauty of this is that I can decide, you know, I can change my mind here. I can say instead of 100% of that red channel luminosity, I can change this, and it changes it without affecting the color. So I keep my tonal manipulation separate from my color manipulation. All right, so this is all pretty interesting and it's really looking pretty cool. But the main reason I went into LAB was not so much for the color, but for the A and B channels. So we're going to actually look at that B channel. I'm going to put the B channel in a layer above all this. So we're going to call this the B channel here. And I get to that by my little friend here, my apply image. And I'm going to find the LAB version. And I'm going to go to the B channel. Okay, so now I've got the B channel on top, and it's kind of like, what do you do with this, right? Well, as it turns out, if I change this to overlay, I get even more contrast enhancing effect. Now, why is that? Well, overlay is a calculation that works off of where middle gray is. So if we look at this again, the only thing here that's neutral middle gray or close to it is the clouds. the sky is darker than 50% neutral gray, and the rocks, all this foreground area is lighter because it's the yellow component of the color, and it's brighter than middle gray. And the blue is darker than middle gray. So if I change the mode to overlay, anything that's darker than middle gray will darken the underlying image. Anything lighter than middle gray will lighten the underlying image. And so we get this kind of effect. And this it's very dramatic. And let's look at the original color image. So we started off with this, and we ended up with that. I didn't have to do any masking or, you know, anything that would reveal the retouching, you know. So, and this is possible because we're using the image against itself. So we're just using the idiosyncrasies of the RGB and LAB channels against the original color image to create this contrast. And in this case, going into LAB, we created a saturation effect that enhanced the image. Okay, so any questions so far?
Does any of this have any effect on resolution?
No, the resolution of the image doesn't change. It's just different channels based on what workspace we're copying the image into. Right, so
Okay.
it's the same set of pixels.
And you're working on the TIFF?
Well, this is a JPEG actually, but it's a regular bitmap image. So I can start, you know, what I do is I start with a raw file and I figure out some basic rendering, usually just something that's, you know, show me detail everywhere, and I bring it in, and then I work on the bitmap image that's the result of that raw processing, and I can do all these further manipulations.
So that could be JPEG, TIFF, or PSD. Doesn't really
Any
matter.
bitmap format. It doesn't matter. When it's in Photoshop and it's open, it is just a collection of pixels, right? So, so you've seen now simple adaptation of this approach and a little more complicated. Here's some interesting things you can do with this approach. So let's look at a kind of this is a sort of a problem image, right? It's a really great shot of this really adorable little African-American kid here. And one of the issues that we have, especially with these really dark skin images, is that when it goes to print, this level of skin tone gets muddy. And I have to find a way of brightening that up without like making it look weird. If I just apply a curve to this, I can get, you know, I can certainly brighten it up, but very often it'll get it'll look strange because we're actually reducing the contrast by brightening up the image with a curve. So there's a solution here. And again, whenever I'm faced with any kind of a problem, the first thing I'm going to do is look at the channels, right? So I'm looking for what's going to be my friend for what I want to do. I want to make the skin lighter. So I look at, you know, if I go to the blue channel, well, that's definitely not my friend. I mean, the skin is really dark here. It's not any better in the green channel, but guess what? In the red channel, the skin is pretty bright. Okay, very cool. So in this image, I think really I only need this one channel to affect the brightness of the skin. And with pictures of people, it's always the red channel is going to be brighter. It doesn't matter whether it's African American or Hispanic or you know, Caucasian. That red channel skin color is more red than it is anything else, so it's going to be brighter in the red channel. So let's do that. In fact, since I only need that one channel, I'm going to just do it the lazy way, which is the channel mixer, right? So I'll just put the channel mixer in there. And to get the red channel, I just use black and white with red filter, which gives me 100% of the red channel. And now all I need to do is I'm going to change the layer blend mode to luminosity. And now I've brightened up that skin. Okay, so now what's the problem? I've brightened the red skin, great. It actually looks very natural, but I've totally blacked out the blue. So, you know, I could just mask this off. This is a really easy thing to mask off, but I'm too lazy to do that. So I'm going to show you a little trick. We're gonna go to that blending option thing again. And this time we're going to blend if, and we're going to use the red channel, because the red channel has more contrast in it. In the red channel, the shorts are black and the skin is bright. So if I use the red channel, I say, okay, everywhere that the channel is black, I want to blend through. So I'm kind of blending through anything that's darker than 20 here, and you can see I've brought back the blue. The problem is that right at that edge transition, you see there's it's kind of posterized, because what it's saying is right when you hit that, you know, level of 20, that's when you want to start, you know, blending through. And it's right a very strict transition. It's a single pixel, a single value. So I get, you know, this kind of, these little posterization effects where it's blending subtly. So in order to smooth that out, I have to split this little slider. So again, you saw this before. I'm going to hold down the Option key and split that black slider apart. And you can kind of see how now it's smoothed that transition, because now it's happening gradually starts at 62. And once it gets to 20, you're seeing fully through to the underlying layer.
Nice.
Okay,
That's pretty cool. That's very good. I love it.
Okay, so and just because we're here, and I'm going to show you one other technique that I find really useful for this sort of thing, to just pop the highlights. So he has, you know, these nice little highlights on his face. You know, very often when we photograph really dark African American skin, we get baby oil out and we have them oil up, because that creates a little shine, and the shine helps to pick up highlights. And, you know, think about those really dark NBA, you know, basketball players that are just like coal black. But every photo you see of them, they've got almost bright white highlights on their face. It's so that this, you know, you get some features into the face. So we're going to kind of create an artificial baby oil sheen effect here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a merged version of this image. So I hold down the Option or Alt key and select Merge Visible from the Layer Options flyway here, and that will place a new layer on top. And now, usually for this effect to work properly, I'm going to desaturate this layer. So I'm just going to do a hue saturation adjustment. I'm just going to pull up the hue saturation and apply it directly to that layer. Just desaturate it. Now I'm going to run a filter, but before running a filter, I'm going to convert for smart filters, which turns this into a smart object. So that way we can adjust the filter effect, and you'll see why this is important in a second, right? So now it's a smart object. Now I can, I'm going to make a high pass filter, and I'm looking for, you know, this is one of the reasons I use a smart object, because I want some level of kind of bas relief effect. If I use a really narrow radius, I get more of almost an unsharp mask effect. But if I use a wider radius, at some point I'm going to get this kind of bas relief effect. And when I change the layer blend mode from normal to overlay, I get this kind of contrast enhancing kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Now, because it's a smart object, I can re-enter that filter now after I've got the overlay effect in place and adjust the effect. So what I'm looking for is where do I get the strongest highlights? Okay, so now I'm really starting to see it's at 16. I'm starting to really feel like the highlights are popping out. But the problem here is I'm also making the darks darker, and I don't want to do that. It's too harsh. So I want the darks to stay where they are, and I want the highlights to just pop onto the surface. So here's my trick for that again, is the blending options. So we go down blending options, You're going to see this over and over again. Now this layer is the layer that's been filtered for the overlay high pass effect. And again, what I said was overlay, if it's darker than middle gray, it's going to darken the image. If it's lighter than middle gray, it will lighten the image. And middle gray is exactly at 128. So if I pull that black slider over to 128, anything that's darker than middle gray is not being used in this calculation, right? Anything that's lighter is. So now what I've got is I'm just sort of pinging the highlights without darkening the shadows.
Nice.
Right? So I can get that shiny skin look, and this is quite a bit more effective than this. The original is really just too dark. And I've managed to do this without a very complicated masking and curves and all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
So real quickly, if we can do that with skin that's too dark, we can do it with skin that's too light. So here I have this martial arts instructor, Nathan here, he would prefer to look a lot more muy macho than, the Pillsbury Doughboy. So again, what's the problem here? Let's look for our friend. In this case, I want to make the skin darker. It's not going to be the red channel, because there's why. That's why he looks so bad. There's nothing. He's like a ghost in the red channel. Now the green channel is a little bit better, but the blue channel is right. That's where the tan is. That's the tonal shape of his whole face is much stronger in the blue channel. So here, instead of using the red channel, we're going to use the blue channel. I get the channel mixer up there. I find the blue channel. Actually, let's use the preset here, black and white using blue filter. There we go. We apply luminosity. And we've darkened the skin, but it's the same problem, right? We're affecting the blue, but the solution's exactly the same. If we go over to the blending options, we'll blend again, all the contrast between the blue and the skin is in the red channel. So if we blend through, we can find the point where the blue channel starts coming in. Actually, it should be this layer. Here we go. Because the color image is underneath. And we'll just split this just a little bit. And now we're done. Now we've darkened the skin very effectively. Okay. Any questions at this point?
That's great. I also like to see that you've moved your toolbar over to the other side like I have.
Yeah, I'm right-handed. I
Yeah.
don't want to reach over there. That's awkward. I just
I know
moved the
people look at
toolbar
my
over.
Photoshop and go, what happened to your tools? It's right here where they belong.
Right, exactly. Now, if you're left-handed, I would flip the whole thing. I'd put everything over on the left side. It's a little more difficult. Photoshop doesn't make it quite as nice when you do that, but you can still do it. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes. You want to see one more? Are we good if I go over time just a little
Yeah,
bit?
well, sure. And we also wanted to touch on that Impressionist too.
Yeah, the Impressionist technique. Okay.
Lee, quick question here, if I may,
Yeah.
John. I noticed a lot of these you're working in JPEG, and looks like the exposure would need to be like dead on because of the amount of information. So would these effects that you're doing be even more dramatic if you're working with RAW and a really rich file?
Well, with RAW, you're constrained to whatever you can do in the RAW processor, so ACR, right? You need to develop it into a bitmap in order to apply the channels, because we can't really get at the channels in the RAW processor.
I
Right,
guess
so
maybe does 8-bit versus 16-bit affect?
Not my whole thing about 8 versus 16. 16 is the benefit you get from going in 16 channels. I'd say 99% of the time is invisible. You can't really see the difference.
Especially by the time it gets to print in a
Yeah,
magazine.
it really, I have yet to see a correction that you could do in 16-bit that you couldn't do as well in 8-bit.
Mhm.
The question would be like, color space. If you're using a wider gamut color space, your channel structure will be a little smoother than it would be in, say, sRGB, but these channel calculation effects would be less dramatic if you're using a wider gamut color space, because the channels are grayer. They inherently don't have as much contrast in a wider gamut. So in ProPhoto, the difference between the channels isn't as great. So it's actually, if my attitude is, I don't need anything more than sRGB to make a great looking image, right? So I don't care. I by default, I'll go into sRGB almost every time. There are occasions where I might want that smoother channel in a channel calculation, but sometimes I may develop out a version of the image in ProPhoto just for that channel, and I'll use that against the sRGB that I'm working on to create the effect that I'm looking for.
How come you're not working in TIFF?
Just because the files I happen to have on this are JPEGs.
Okay, okay, okay.
I mean, normally I wouldn't work with JPEGs just because they're already crunched up. But, truth be told, if you have a good JPEG, and, most of the JPEGs straight out of the camera are fantastic. If you have the proper exposure and,
And color.
I mean, and if you can't get a good exposure, it's not going to help you whether you're, using a JPEG or a TIFF. It's still going to be the same, So it's much better to, to worry about things like getting your exposure and getting an image that looks proper out of the camera, than it is to work in TIFF or JPEG or sRGB or ProPhoto RGB.
But in terms of JPEG, every time you do something in a JPEG, you're losing information.
Yeah, you're losing information. I got plenty of information here.
It's each time you save it too, not while you're working on it.
Yeah, if I save this as a JPEG and I saved it at a high compression ratio, and I saved it 20 or 30 times that way, you'd start to see some real degradation. But why would you do that? I mean, it's like, if you're not going to do that, don't worry about working with JPEGs.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can't see, you really can't see the effect. So anyway, since we're here, and I'm kind of running out of time, let's see if I can, let's see, is that one better or is this one better? They're not the most colorful. Let's try this one. So if I wanted to create a kind of pointillist effect with this, what I would do is I'd make a new layer. I would fill that layer with, let's fill that with 50% gray. Right, and ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to put this in overlay mode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a noise filter. So we're going to put noise into this gray layer. And we're going to put a lot of noise in, right? And I'm not going to use monochromatic. I'm going to use color noise. Okay. So it's kind of, very, very noisy effect here, right? Now, to get that kind of, impressionistic look out of it, I'm going to take a portion of the noise here, and I'm going to scale it up. So in essence, I'm making the noise larger. All right, so we can experiment. I think maybe soft light's a little bit better than overlay. Now this is not exactly kind of a pointillistic effect, but it's a simple thing that you can experiment with, adding this sort of colored noise over the image, to create a little bit more of a kind of a, you know,
Surratt.
a Surratt sort of, pointillist effect. It's that there are, like the Topaz plugin does a much better job of this, but sometimes I'll do something like this just to see if it's worth playing with, Okay. Do we still have enough time to do one more?
Sure.
All right, let's see if I can find my other
It-
image.
There's always time.
There's always time. All right, let's do one. So here, this is an image, and this is kind of, there's nothing terribly wrong with this image, but I'm going to use the 10-channel workflow to enhance it. And this would be kind of the way I would process it out of the raw processor if I knew I was going to do 10-channel workflow stuff. So I just kind of get it sort of very flat. I'm not going to put too much contrast in it. I want to have as much, shadow detail as possible and much highlight detail as possible because I'm going to add all the contrast using this 10-channel workflow effect. So right now I process out a fairly flat looking image, and I'm going to, again, we look at the channels, and we look at the individual channel. In almost any landscape image, you're going to find the red channel is going to look the best because it makes the sky darker, and the elements that you want brighter are brighter in the red channel. So we're gonna use the red channel, and I'm going to use that the empty layer and apply image approach, right? So we'll start with the red channel, and image, apply image. There's my red channel. Okay. We can go luminosity, right? Great. It's making everything look better, except now the church, instead of kind of red brick, it's sort of salmon colored. So that's no good. I want to darken that down to get it back to looking more like the red brick. So, we're going to use the green channel for that. This is sort of like the sunflower, right? So we're going to do image, apply image, and we'll get to the background to get the original green channel. And the green channel, the only place it's darker than the red image of the red channel is in the church. So the idea here is I'm going to apply it in darken mode. Now, the problem currently, if I do darken mode, it says replace whatever you can make darker, replace that with pixels from this layer. And the pixels in this layer are gray. That's because I'm applying the red channel in luminosity mode. So I'm replacing the bright red pixels with the green pixels. So what I need to do is actually get this to apply to the red before the red is applied to the color. And to do that, we make a clipping group. So if I hold down the Option or Alt key and I kind of hover the cursor in between those two layers, I can click, and now this forms a clipping group. So what happens here, and you can kind of see if I can make this to work. You see the little angle arrow here. So what it means is that this green layer is being applied to the red layer first before that is applied to the background. So the normal way of the order of the channel blending is changed, and that's what that clipping group gives us. So now we've darkened, that red channel. In fact, I'm also bringing out, I'm darkening some of the highlights here that the red channel put in. So I'm going to mask this green layer, and I'm just going to take that foreground off, right? And it's maybe too dark, so let's reduce the opacity there just a little bit, brighten that up just a little bit.
Lee, quick question here.
Yeah.
If you had changed the orders of your layers and done your green channel before the red, in other words, you go red, green background, would that have changed?
Well, then applying the red, I could apply the red in darken mode, right? But then I wouldn't have this halfway. This is not fully at 100%. It's at 67%.
So it's really more about control in the way that you're doing it here.
It's about the control and what I want to do, right? So in general, I always start with a channel that has the most dramatic effect. That's doing more of what I want. And that would be the red channel. And then I think about correcting the flaw that it introduced. So in this case, the flaw is that, you know, that church got too bright. So I've darkened it with that green channel. Okay, again, now the color could use some enhancements. So let's go make a duplicate, and we'll merge it, and this will be an LAB copy. So I'll say LAB. And again, got to turn it into LAB. We'll do our curve adjustment here. Do overlay. Take out the L using blending options. We'll take out the L channel. So now it's just enhancing the contrast of the A and B channels. And I think, you know, there's two things wrong. I mean, the sky's a little electric blue. I like the green and saturation enhancement, but the red's just gone too far. So we look to the A channel. And this, instead of blending from the dark side, we're blending the lighter part of that calculation out. So I go down to 128 from the highlight side. And, you know, if I don't hit exactly 128, it's okay. But split that channel apart to bring back a little bit of that color saturation, but not too much, because I don't want it to look like candy apple. I want the brick to look, you know, reasonable. And you know, we're gonna go with this. So again, I'm highlight both those layers, convert this into a smart object, and hold down the shift and take that up to a tab of the original RGB document. Comes in on top. We change this to color mode. So now I'm applying the color to my already tonally manipulated original. And again, this means that I can, underneath that color, I can alter the tonal structure if I want, make it a little darker, a little lighter, right? Without altering the color. So that's one of the benefits of doing it this way. And just to finish it off, let's get, and we're going to get the B channel again into this layer. This is very common for a landscape image. Getting that, going to the LAB copy, and that's the same size. So let's go. Here we go. So get the B. The B channel has much darker sky, and we're going to do that overlay effect. And so we've really darkened the sky even more and kind of turned the highlights on, but we've blasted out this front a little too much. So put a layered mask in there and just mask off that part of it. And, you know, the beauty of this, it's like I'm taking the yellow highlights. The highlights on the trees are yellower than the shadows. And it's like I'm popping those highlights with that B channel. Now it's making this a little lighter too. So now I can come back down to my green channel and make that back, get that back a little darker again. Right, so that's one of the beauties, again, having everything in these layers makes it easy to control. Right, so, and coming back to this, let's look at the original, where we ended up. Now there's one other thing that I want to do, and I've got a couple minutes here. One of the problems of enhancing the color globally, which is what we're doing when I go into LAB and I'm really increasing the contrast in those A and B channels, it's globally enhancing the color. And the problem is that the shadows get this color boost as well. And it's one of the things I think that makes digital photography look more digital, is that you get this kind of just the color exaggerations too much in the shadows. So what I'd like to do is desaturate the shadows. So we've seen using the channels, the RGB channels and the LAB, especially the A and the B channels, but we haven't touched on CMYK yet. So what I'm going to do is make a duplicate of this, and it'll be a merged duplicate. And this one we're going to convert to CMYK. Right. So I'm going to go image mode, and I'm just going to go CMYK. And the reason I'm doing that is to get at this black channel, because the black channel will kind of carry the shadow information for you. So I'm going to use this to make a mask for just the shadows. So to manipulate this mask, I'm gonna I could just contrast it up. I could just run a curve on it directly, and you know, we'll make the shadow a little darker, maybe make the highlight. We'll take out more of the highlight because I'm really only interested in the shadow parts. Okay, so now let's go back to my original, which has all the layers. And what I'm going to do, I want to desaturate the shadows. So I'm going to use this approach. I'm going to make a solid color layer. I just want to make that, you know, gray. So if I change the blend mode here from normal to color, it takes all the color out, right? Now here's the trick. I'm going to take and highlight my layer mask here. And I'm going to use that same apply image, because I can apply an image at just about anywhere. I'm going to apply it to that layer mask, and I'm going to find my CMYK and my black channel, and I'm going to invert the black. So now I've placed that K channel, my edited K channel, into the layer mask. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I'll just solo that. So there's my mask. So the bright parts are dulling down the color, which is in the shadows. And this is a very subtle sort of effect. So let's look at this. So you can kind of see, it looks like the shadows are actually getting a little darker. And, you know, maybe I can, I'll apply a curve now to that layer mask just while I'm looking at the effect. And if I want that desaturation effect to be a little stronger, I'm going to brighten up the bright parts, which are the shadow areas in that layer mask. So now if I turn, you can kind of see like the color disappearing a little bit on that shadow side of the building. And this is what happens naturally. And you see it in the trees too. It actually makes the shadows look darker, even though I haven't actually darkened them using a curve or anything, because less saturated colors look darker to the human visual system. Right, so we're adding just a little more contrast and a more natural looking color. The shadows are less colorful, and that's the way they are in reality. So this is just a little fine-tuning effect that can have strong or subtle effects, but you can kind of see it. You can see how that's making that look just a little bit more natural. So that's something that I'm very common. I always do that at the end, desaturate the shadows just a little bit. Just to kind of finish it off. All right,
Okay.
So let's kind of finish off
Great.
my little
thank you.
presentation here. So
John and Lee, I have just a quick question.
Sure.
If I wanted to spend more time, you know, practicing, investigating, learning these techniques, like where do I go?
you'll see that in a second.
Great.
So
Super.
I'm
Good
gonna
leading
stop. I'm gonna
question.
give you a link to go to, and I have a whole course on the 10-channel workflow. Anyway, this is the basic strategy, right? So we're gonna going to use those channel luminosities to shape the tone and contrast of the color image. So, you know, first, what we're going to do is examine the RGB channels individually to see if we can find one that has like better contrast and just looks better, right? And so we're going to place those channels in layers above the color image in luminosity mode. And sometimes we can explore the combination of channels to optimize that tonal rendering. And then we're going to duplicate the resulting image into LAB for color enhancement. And that's generally where I'm going to add saturation. And there's a lot of fine tuning things that you can do, but most of the time, that's all I'm doing with LAB is to get that pop and to get access to those other channels. So we're going to use curves and blending options to control the saturation. And we're going to apply that LAB image to the RGB layers to place this enhanced color. And then we want to consider using color and contrast tone in separate layers, right? So the LAB color is in a separate layer than our black and white channels, which are controlling our contrast and our tone. And then finally, you know, consider that K channel for building a shadow mask to target the shadows to do this desaturating effect. Okay. So that's my website. You can follow me on Twitter. And also, I have a YouTube channel. So go ahead and check out my YouTube channel. I have a lot of free tutorials up there. I do something called the Photoshop rant, which I kind of do on a regular basis, although I'm a little behind. So the last one up there is like a month or so old. But I've been trying to do that once a week. I have kind of fallen off the card a little bit here. But at any rate, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and you know, also ring the bell, right? So you know when I have a new video up there. You can also consider following me on Instagram. I do 3 posts a day, so they're sort of thematic. I have a couple of books. One book's called Mastering Exposure in the Zone System for Digital Photographers. My bestseller, of course, is Skin, the Complete Guide to Digitally Lighting, Photographing, and Retouching Faces and Bodies. It's a little old now, but there's still good information in it, and you can still find it in a Kindle version on Amazon. So if you're looking for more in-depth stuff, this is my website. Go to the Education Online Courses section under the Education menu. And when you go to the online courses, you will find over 17 courses now covering all aspects of post-production workflow, retouching. There's that 10-channel workflow course. The cost has gone up recently. But if you're really, really interested in this and you wanted a slight discount, I would appreciate it if you paid full price, which I think is $90 now. But if you really need a discount, email me, which is very simple, varis@varis.com. Email me and I'll send you a promo code for a discount. My latest course is this one, the 21st Century Lighting Techniques. It's about lighting in layers with Photoshop. So again, my website, varis.com. My email is varis@varis.com. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you. This
Thank
has
you
been great.
very, very much.
Yeah.
Very good.
Cool. I'm going to shut down the Facebook first.
Okay,
And
Lee,
we'll
quick question here. It kind of reminds me a little bit like HDR, but with greater control, much greater control.
Yeah, and you avoid those sort of weird HDR haloing kind of things.
Right.
You know, whenever you get that shadow area against a light area and you're trying to pull, you know, open up the shadows with HDR, you get this kind of weird like haloing that creates this grungy look, and you avoid that completely using this approach.
One last go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, John. I have just a curiosity question, Lee. That was great. Thank you very much, you and John. But when you apply that curves layer and you make no adjustment to it whatsoever and you put it into overlay,
Yeah.
why does that make an effect? How does that even?
Well, it's the overlay calculation. So you overlay, you know, the way it works is it takes anything that's, you know, brighter. As it gets brighter than 50% gray, it has an increasing effect. So when you have a flat curve, that's just like making a copy of the image and putting it in that layer.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's
But
so.
but it has it's less intensive memory wise because it's not actually adding those pixels in the saved document. You can have that layer and it doesn't take up any space really. But it's just like copying the image. So at the lighter parts of the image are going to lighten the underlying image, and that's creating that contrast effect. So, you know, the advantage of having the flat curve in there is that if I chose to go into the curve and actually edit the curve, I can amplify the effect
Oh,
or mitigate it for certain, you know,
oh,
regions of the
sure.
image, or, you know, it just gives you a lot of flexibility.
You can
and a lot
spend
of
more
control.
time with it. Oh, that's very
Yeah.
interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you. Wow.
So, John, did you have another one?
I had one more question, and it goes back to capture. I'm still struggling with this. A friend of mine, when I shoot a lot of nature for fun,
Yeah.
but one of the approach that is often recommended is that you would expose as bright as you can without clipping your highlights
Right.
to get the most information in your file. Again, we're shooting raw. And that what the intent is in post, you take away information, whether it's in Lightroom or in Photoshop. Can you comment on that? Because I'm come from the idea of get it right in camera, meaning you get it tonally balanced. But the idea of getting a lot of data and stripping it away, I don't know if there's good or bad.
Well, I mean, you know,
comment.
that's just one way of looking at it. I mean, exposing so that you have detail to work with, I think is important. But it kind of depends on what's the most important thing about the image, right? If you have an image, and let's just say hypothetically, what you've got is a marble statue, and it's standing in front of a doorway which looks into, you know, a sort of interior space. And, you know, your one philosophy would be, well, you know, we're going to try to expose just bright enough so that we're not clipping anything in that marble statue, and we can see into that interior space. Well, that's only if what's in the interior space is important. If instead what's important is the shadow, if you expose that marble, that bright white marble too high, you leave less space for you to add contrast and shape into the statue. It gets, you know, like the capture it does curve a bit. So even though, you know, you think of digital capture as being totally linear, it actually does curve when it gets to the top, and I probably should be doing it this way. I see it.
So that's a little shoulder.
I know what you mean.
You know, there's a little shoulder, right? So if the highlight's in that flat part of the shoulder, the whole marble statue is exposed way up there. You don't have any space to add contrast there because it's, you know, it would be better if it was exposed, underexposed. Then you could push the highlight up and get some shadow in it. You understand?
I do.
So a lot of it's your decisions all are at the point of capture are based on what you want to see happen to the final image. So you can't always say just always expose for the highlight. You may,
Expose to the
you
right.
know, expose to the right. You may want to actually underexpose that highlight because you know that you're going to push contrast into that, right? And who cares about the interior space, right? And now, if the interior space was, you know, if it was important, then yeah, now we've got to play that game. And, you know, in some cases, you're doing HDR exposure bracket is appropriate.
Right.
You know, and I do that all the time, and I'll do the HDR just in Lightroom because I'm not looking for an exaggerated HDR effect. I'm just looking to get detail everywhere, and then I'll take it and do the 10-channel workflow and work my magic on the image in ways that I can control more directly than I could of using the HDR software.
I can see this process being really helpful for anyone who does real estate, which is a really active part of the photography industry right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
Right now, anyway.
Let me
Thank
add
you.
something to this. Doesn't it go back to the analog days where when we shot film,
Yeah,
black and white film, you expose for the shadows and process or print for the highlights.
right.
Okay, and for transparencies, it was just the opposite.
Right.
The central question is, isn't digital photography shooting in negative analog film?
It's very similar.
Because
Yeah.
I've seen some stuff that I guess it was either Shiwi or Resnick did, where he exposed the image was exposed 7 stops overexposed,
Yeah.
and all you saw was white, and then he began showing what takes place when you bring it up, when you throw away all that data, all right, and it became a normal image again.
Yeah. I really hate that analogy when they say, oh, we're going to throw away data.
Well,
You know,
right.
but we're going to expose for the data. I love this. We're exposing for the data. I don't really give a shit about the ones and zeros. I'm concerned about the image. Any way that I can get the image that I want, that's what I want to do. I think thinking of it in that terms, you know, like data. Okay, well, all the data is above the 50% part, right? So I'm going to try to expose to the right to get all this data. You can actually damage your end result by overexposing just to get more data if that's not what you want. It's not, you know, it's like if this area should be dark, well, then I should expose it so it's dark, not like, you know, overexpose it deliberately. And then have, you know, because if you overexpose too much, you get that effect where, you know, all your values are up on that slope. And so the tonal separation between each data point is less and less and less. They get closer and closer together up on the top of that shoulder of the curve, right? Because it's flat. So you have a whole bunch of values there, but tonally, they're all very close together. So if we add contrast, we separate them apart, but they're just separated in a flat line. We don't get additional tonal information. You have to actually get those values a little lower to give you some space to move the data points apart to add that contrast.
Okay.
So that's very reductionist to say, well, we're going to expose for the data. You're going to expose in the way that gives you the best result.
Right.
And in some cases, that is like you're just going to disregard that whole data argument and try to get a good exposure. You know, and in the end, it's like you already know how to do a good exposure, and just stop worrying so much about trying to deliberately overexpose the image. Just get a good exposure, because sometimes a good exposure has values that are black in it. You know, and it's like we don't care if there's no data in the black.
Right. I mean, that was one of the things when digital came in. All of a sudden, everyone was just opening up the shadows, and we lost the deep blacks of analog photography. So let's bring them back.
Lee, can I ask what, and I say it is very relevant, what monitors and color profiling do you use?
That's kind of interesting. Right now I have a kind of middle of the road LG monitor. I see no point in investing, you know, a huge amount of money to get a monitor that has a huge color gamut. Because
No one
the
else
color
is gonna
gamut of
have
the
it.
monitor is well beyond what I could ever print or reproduce. And if I can make the image look good in sRGB, then it will look good everywhere, right? If I can make it look good in ProPhoto RGB, it really is only going to look good in ProPhoto, and are no devices that can display ProPhoto, right? And why would I spend, you know, like $3,000 to $5,000 on a fancy monitor that's going to give me, you know, like 98% of Adobe RGB? Right? I don't care, right? You know, I like to say it's like, you know, when you go into a recording studio and you're at the mixing console and the guy's mixing for the final of the album, he has these cheap ass speakers up there.
Right, you listen to on car speakers.
right? And he does the mix and he gets it all worked up, but the final mix is done with the cheap ass speakers because he wants to make sure that it sounds good in the car radio,
Yep.
on this guy's funky iPhone with bad headphones. I mean, he's trying to make it look good everywhere, and that's the way I feel. It's like, why would you hold any, you always have the raw capture. The raw capture is the maximum amount of data you'll ever have in that image. So don't throw away your raw files. I mean, hold on to them because maybe 20 years from now, we might have better raw processing capabilities and can extract maybe a little more data from it. But you only need it to look good in sRGB because that's the bulk of how it's going to be displayed. On the internet, it's only sRGB, and sRGB already has more color gamut than you can in generally. It's a bigger color gamut than you could actually place on paper, even with an Epson inkjet print. Now, in certain color ranges, yeah, there's a better yellow on an Epson than there is in the RGB file, but most of the time that's, those kinds of colors are not as important. It's not important to you, like how yellow is that yellow? If it's next to something blue, it's going to look pretty damn yellow. So what you're really concerned with is the lights and darks. How do I make the contrast? How do I shape the tones and contrast of this image to make it look like a photograph and make it have some three-dimensionality? That's all in the lights and darks. That's not in the color gamut.
If I use that analogy that you just gave, what's more important, the lens or the camera body?
I would say the lens.
Bingo. Why?
Because the lens, I mean, what you capture in the lens, that's the limit of, what you're going to get.
And doesn't the lens see a hell of a lot more than a human eye?
Well, it can. It certainly has better resolving power, but it doesn't necessarily see more because...
Oh, sure, it has to see more.
Well, the problem is that the lens is attached to a camera and the eye is attached to a human brain.
Yeah, but what's the analogy between the human brain and the camera body? And that's the chip.
That's sort of the chip. Yeah, the chip is more like the retina, right? So the retina's information is interpreted by the brain. So we actually can kind of see more than is actually there in some cases. In some cases we don't, because we don't perceive into the infrared, for instance.
Well, only because the lens and the chip are not fluid like the eye and the brain.
Right.
So we're constantly manipulating or moving focus so that we ultimately see one.
Right.
But the lens is any modern day lens can see a hell of a lot more than the human eye.
In terms of resolving power, yes. And in terms of actual color perception, a lot of the color perception on a chip is sort of poor compared to our ability to discern subtle variation in color.
It's the same thing with the human eye. Everybody's different.
Everybody's different, but we all have, we have the ability to perceive things that are hard to make look right on digital. So it's not a cut and dry. You can't say, the certain aspects of the digital capture can extract more information from a scene than we could with the naked eye, but on the other hand, subtle variations of color is a perception issue that is mostly handled in the human brain, not in the actual specifics of the mechanics of the capture.
Okay.
Cool. Well, we're at 90 minutes now, so I think we're going to put this one down here. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We'll be back on Monday with JB Sally and bringing your strobes outdoors to do environmental portraiture work.
Lee, this was great. I loved it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I'm just going to stop the
All right.
recording.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
A lot.
All right. Bye-bye.